اهلا وسهلا. غتسمحوا لي غنقدم هذا المشروع بالانجليزيه.
قرب على الميكروفون please.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, first, it's a privilege to be here. And when I was asked to come and talk about this particular project, I couldn't resist. I think as architects, we all have one like this, one that defines us, that helps us really crystallize what we want to do. And for me and for Lina, it was this incredible project in Volubilis. Volubilis is an outpost. It's where you were sent by the Romans to the most western area if you were doing something really bad and naughty. It's not something desirable. I mean, here you have Roman ruins all over and they're incredible. Volubilis is the most western city of the Roman Empire. It has one incredible beauty, is that you see it today. The Roman left it 2,000 years ago. Nothing is built around it. The hills, the wheat, the grapes, the cypresses, it hasn't changed. And as an architect, when you're asked to work in that territory, obviously the question is an immediate one, how you answer the question of the program. But it's also a much more essential and vital one. In this particular case, there was a big issue before we started. In the early 1920s, the French archaeologist built a small compound at the entry of the site, which you can see near the unbuilt area. The French, being less smart than the Romans, they actually built in the only place the Romans didn't build because the land was not stable. So all these buildings were actually in ruin. They were dangerous. And I was asked to come to repair them. We had a wonderful Minister of Culture at the time who was born in the city right next to it, Moulay Zahoun. And for 2 years with UNESCO, because this is a World Heritage Site, it's been a World Heritage Site for 30 years, there is a debate about whether we keep these buildings or not. This is, I think, a fundamental debate. There's a dogma from UNESCO that says everything that's old and that's there doesn't move. On the other hand, the Moroccan government, this Minister of Culture, thought that it was a political decision to make new traces. Plus, it was quite impossible to rehabilitate these things. So after 2 years or 2.5 years of conversation and not being able to meet, the decision was made to tear them down, and it was done over a weekend before we talked about with the UNESCO expert, which made them a bit angry before we started this project, which is never a good way to start. But the important part in this is to say that an architectural project is first and foremost a cultural crystallization, not just the answer to a program. In this particular case, what we had to do is to build in an area that we knew was unstable and to create a dialogue, a presence with what was there. The city of Volubilis is about 100 hectares. It's huge, it's beautiful. It's an incredible experience to have. And the building that were there before actually stopped the view because they were sitting on top. So we decided to do 3 things. First, to say that the highest point of our building would be lower than the lowest point of the site. The second is to not do a building per se, but a dam. It's a huge 300-meter long wall, concrete wall, that holds the entire hill. And thirdly, the elements of content are never one single thing. They're like a rosary bead attached to this extraordinary long wall. Once we made those decisions, then the question is, how do you build in a place that hasn't been touched for 100 years and even more for 2,000 years? And it was all for us about how we learned from the Romans. First, the Romans, they always know where to go. It's a rule of thumb. I use it everywhere. If the Romans have been there, it's a good place. The wind, the soil, the water, they have a sense of settlement, something we need to learn about. We build cities where they should not be built. We make buildings that should not be made. There's a certain essential directness, rawness to the way the Romans do it that we need to learn from. The second thing is, and this is going to sound a bit strange, but hear me out. Obviously, it's going to be a building, but we wanted the ruin of the building to be inscribed in the building itself. What it means is, it's a field of ruin everywhere. What makes a ruin is the fact there's no weather threshold, no doors, no windows. You can walk through a house and through a garden and not feel that relationship. But also that you can feel each material resisting differently. The harsher material, they stay longer. The lighter material, they dissipate faster. And that's how we made our building. We made our building thinking about what it should be once layers upon layers upon layers will be erased. We only used materials from the site, literally from the site, and we only used material that were already inside the Roman city. That's concrete, wood, and stone. It's the narrowest palette you can see. Another way of learning from the Romans is to consider that the relationship isn't just about man, but it's often beyond the scale of man, a way to discuss and negotiate with the landscape, with a much greater landscape. And that's, for us, an incredible lesson, because if we always consider our scale as a way to define everything that we do, we miss the amazing opportunity to create a conversation with nature. Lastly, and I touched upon this when I talked about materiality, it has to do with the rawness of things. And that's something that then we carried through our entire work. We like naked buildings. We don't think buildings should be dressed too much. We think that we have to erase everything until it stops making sense. So it's not a process of adding things. It's a process of subtracting things, of not being afraid to disappear, not being afraid of not being so present. It's very interesting to be here and to look at all the projects I've seen, and it's just by chance that there are two archaeological centers shown one after the next. Similar question, but completely radical answer differently in this case, where we believe in this case that if this building didn't exist, it would not be a problem. But if it exists, it should not be an eyesore. It should be at the scale of what's around it. I'm showing here a view from the entry where you are above the building and you can see the Roman city on the other side. So you are within the boundary of the city, but you're not where the city is. So the building has to do a few things. Obviously, there's programs such as cafe and bathroom and visitor centers and archaeological laboratories, but I'm not going to talk about these because these we know how to cater to, and they're really not that important. The building becomes a way to enter the site, a promenade, a way to create vantage points to what you're going to see. So you're as much outside as you are inside. It's a very famous site in Morocco, and every school kid go to visit it. It's 500,000 people every year that go visit it. But in the summer, it could be 50 degrees. It's very hot. So half of the job is to create shade. So the stairs, for example, here, they become a covered amphitheater where you can have a teacher and a school group being taken through the visit before going there. Half of the museum is outside, under. Half of the museum is inside, above. Meaning it's not about looking at the artifacts in a scenographic, museographical kind of way, but it's to actually reduce that dimension, give the elements of understanding before going to see the site. We often describe this project as being as buried and suspended. And the reason we say this, it's because as architects, and maybe there are students here, they often think that doing something that's buried is really a gentle thing to do. It's probably one of the most violent things you can do to a land. If you're putting your building buried in the hill, the way we did it here, you actually remove the hill, put the building, and put back the hill. So it feels like something gentle, but it's extraordinarily violent. So at 10, 15 centimeters of depth, you really have to control where you're sitting this building in the valley, and what it allows to put yourself not just in a humble position, but in a way of entering down the valley all the way up into the site. I want to talk quickly about the two main materials we used, which is concrete and wood. We use concrete because it's profoundly Roman, they invented it. But we also use concrete because it's profoundly Moroccan in the way we use it, starting from right after the independence. It's something very heroic. The concrete isn't Peter Zumthor or Tadawando, very clean. It has acne, it's done with wooden formwork, it sweats, it has a certain presence, almost infrastructural, that we wanted to celebrate here. But being as this is a very poor project, and we take pride in this, by the way, we think the lack of means is often a good thing. We actually used a very expensive wood that's from the region, that's cedar, to make the formwork, which would be crazy if we couldn't afford it. We poured the concrete, we took out the wood, we polished it, and we let it dry for 2 years before we then put it on the facade of the building for shading. This question of time, I want to coin the notion of slow architecture. We're doing it too fast. We should sometime take the time to make it slower, to build it slower. There's a craftsmanship that we need to take pleasure in again. And I know this sounds strange in a world of permanent acceleration, but certain projects should not be built too quickly. And there's a time of construction, I explained it, but there's also the time in which people start to understand and absorb the incredible violence of putting something here where there was nothing at first. This question of time, the materiality, and the rural simplicity. You don't build in the middle of nowhere the way you build in a plot with 2 G+7 buildings on either side. Here, it's not urban rules, it's not setback, you don't have limits of height. You have to start rebuilding parameters of construction that are essential. Where's the wind? Where the sun goes? What's the quality of the soil? Where do I want to see? Where do I shelter myself? And when I said at the beginning that this project was for us something that helped us crystallize what we want to be and what we want to do in the world, it's mostly because from it, we started to develop an approach, not a language, really an approach, one of resistance, one of naked simplicity as much as possible, one where the dialogue is as much with nature as it is with man, and where the presence is just a moment in time. Thank you.
دكتور ياسر.
مرحبا.
مرحبا.
يمكن إذا أبدأ بعبارة استهلالية لتلخص حقيقة تدخلكم، إنه أحكي هالعبارة، إنه ما يلفت النظر في هذا المشروع إنه لا يلفت النظر من الناحية الإيجابية، بحكيها طبعا كل يعني هذه أظن بتلخص هذا، خصوصا يعني الطريقة اللي أنتم الانتنشن تبعكم، النية كانت منذ البداية واضحة، إنه تريدوا أن تغيبوا العمارة لكي تسمحوا للموقع أن يعبر عن نفسه بتلقائية، مكوناته الطبيعية ومكوناته الأثرية التاريخية. وهذا تحقق على فكرة يعني، وأنا أثمن أنه كيف تحقق على جميع المستويات إلى أدق تفصيلة ممكنة. أول شيء كيف التجربة معايشة الموقع من خلال أنكم ما خليتوا الزائر يرى الموقع بصورة بانورامية من أولها، أنه حجبتوا الموقع وتحكمتوا بالتجربة الحسية بحيث أنه يعاينه بمراحل ويعاينه من أسفل إلى فوق، وكأنكم يعني، وهذه عبارة أن بقتبسها منك، أنه تريده أن يعاين الموقع كما رأوه الرومان قبل أن يبنوا مدينتهم. فهذا تحقق من خلال أول شيء حصر فضاء المدخل، اختزال المشروع بحائط استنادي مخفي، ومن خلاله من خلال الدرج المدرج يلج الزائر إلى أوطى نقطة في الموقع كي يبدأ صعوده مرة أخرى إلى المدينة الرومانية. هذا من جهة. فالتحكم بالحركة هذا عنصر أول. الشيء الآخر هو الشخصية التي أضفيت أو أضفتوها على العمارة عندما ظهرت. هي مخفية من جهة، لكن عندما تظهر من الجهة الأخرى لما ينزل هذا ظهرت كآثار. فأنا أريد لو سمحت ترجعنا للسلايد اللي هو يوضح لا، في سلايد قبل هيك. أيوه هذا. يعني أول شيء الجدار الاستنادي مثل ما ذكرت هو جدار أثري بطبيعته، لأنه مادته مادة تاريخية هي لما اخترعوها البوزولانو اللي اخترعوها الرومان، والطريقة التي جعلت الخشب طبار يترك آثاره. هنا استعمل كلمة آثار كمان تحتها خطين على السطح أثناء صب الخرسانة، فجعلته يبدو بالفعل أثري. بل ما يجعله أكثر أثري أنه عندما تضطر تستعمل العمارة بشكلها الحجمي، تستعمل بشكل مقطعي، عريت الجدران وجعلتنا نرى عناصر إنشائية مفككة كل واحد مفصول عن الثاني، فكأنها آثار حديثة. فآثار حديثة تكامل الآثار الحقيقية الموجودة. فأنا أرجع مرة أخرى أكرر أنه ما يلفت النظر في مشروعكم أنه لا يلفت النظر. يعطيك العافية.
Thank you for the presentation. It's a really delicate and beautiful intervention. And it's very interesting that through this architecture and this expression, you raise the question of time, decay, and ruin. In particular, when you think of the wood and the weathering of the wood with time, and the wood going grey, it will surely add to the poetics of this, this idea. My question, in a way, pushing it further, the program function, in a way, will exceed the lifespan of the wood. And how would you anticipate that, especially where wood is used as shading devices or protection to this glass box?
It's a very interesting question, and I'll try to answer it I hope you won't take it too provocatively, but program is really not that important. We're forced in the contemporary realm to define our buildings by their program, whereas we have to be able to imagine buildings with such a resilience that they can be transformed radically. If you live in a Parisian apartment that's Haussmannien, you live in something that's 150 years old and the program has changed dramatically, and the building itself is allowed to absorb this. If you do the same housing building now, it can only serve as housing, and in 25 years it will be demolished. So when we design a building, we cater to what's possible there, but we also allow for other things to happen, even though it may bring in comfort to the current program that's imagined. Even though you allow people or you make them go outside even though they don't want to. I think program as a single usage element and comfort are two of the worst danger of contemporary architecture. So I agree that the building would weather and the program will change. And as long as there's enough of infrastructural mass to it, it could be easily cannibalized and transformed. If you go to the city of Rome or Lucca today, you go to the old amphitheater. It's 2,000 years old, and now it's completely inhabited with housing. Nobody has a problem with this. I think our capacity to repair, cannibalize, and maybe not finish our own building, leave a certain level of indeterminacy, where we don't know absolutely everything that's going to happen, is almost a rule of thumb for their capacity to weather the trials of time. I don't know if I make any sense. Okay.
اوكي طارق نهضر معك بالعربيه
مرحبا.
وتجاوب بالعربيه. بس ما عنديش سؤال، يعني هي اللي بغيت نرجع لشنو قالت الزميله ديما، وبالنسبه لشنو قلتي في الاول، هو الوقت ماده كباقي المواد، ماده البناء استعملتيها كماده بناء، وقلتي شي حاجه يعني جميله في الاول بالنسبه للمآثر اللي كاينه في فولوبيليس، وهو ان ما بين الصفات ديالها والسمات ديالها هو ان كندخلوا لدار ما بقاش فيها باب، ما بقاتش فيها شرجم، وهذا يمكن جزء من الجواب اللي يمكن تبغيه ديما، يعني في التصور ديال المشروع ديالك من بعد منين الخشب يمشي ومنين الزاج يتهرس ومنين. انا دابا غنسلف شنو قالت قبيله زميله نجاة، يعني هي فضلت ما تتكلمش على مشروع تونسي ودوت ان سا شونس كي لون بونس، دونك يعني نفس الشيء بالنسبه لي. ميرسي، شكرا طارق.
ميرسي.
أهم ما يميز هذا المشروع الحقيقة عنصرين مهمين. العنصر الأول هو عنصر المفاجأة الحقيقة، للي يزور المنطقة راح يتفاجأ بالمبنى، لأنه المبنى ما ظاهر الحقيقة، فحقيقة خلقت فد عنصر جذب ومفاجأة، وهذه فد ذكاء الحقيقة للمصمم. هذا العنصر نفسه ينطينا عنصر آخر، هو أنه أنت احترمت الطبيعة، يعني انطيت ريسبكت قوي للنيتشر مال المنطقة. You didn't destroy the nature of the site. فهذا حقيقة فد ابروتش كلش ممتاز، إضافة إلى التعامل مع الماتيريال. يعني بدل ما تترك الكونكريت كجدار أصم، خليت له التكستشر مال الخشب اللي هو يتوائم ويا طبيعة المنطقة. فالحقيقة تعامل مع الكتل أيضا كتل قوية، لكن في الحقيقة هي تحسها أنه متماشية مع السايت. ف good solution. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا.
في عندنا صور من جوه المبنى بتورينا شكله عامل ازاي من جوه المبنى لبره. انا لاحظت انه قليلين قوي الصور دي.
ما سمعتش اسمها.
صور من اندور من المبنى، من الانتيريور بتاع المبنى، من داخل المبنى، علشان بس اعرف السيناريو وانا بتحرك جوه بستخدم المبنى ده ازاي، يعني لانه معظم الشغل موجود من بره وانا مستمتع، بس انا الحقيقه عايز اشوف رحلتي من جوه عامله ازاي. فدورت على صور كتير، قريت البلانات كويس، بس كنت عايز اعرف في الاخر الاحساس عامل ازاي. عندنا صور لكده؟
لا ما اظن موجوده، احنا دورنا عليها على فكره في
هو دي كلها برضو يعني
كله اوت دور.
حضرتك معماري حساس،
ماشي كله اوت دور،
فدايما دايما واخد المبنى على انه الفورم بتاعه عامل ازاي وكده، بس انا عايز اعرف انا رحت هناك ليه. فرحت علشان هعمل رحله، فالحقيقه دي كانت مستوقفاني شويه، لانه حاسس ان المسافه بعيده، والرساله اللي عايزه توصل من علاقه المبنى بالموقع بالاثر حصلت من هنا. انتهت. فخلاص انا داخل المبنى ليه بقى؟
Okay, if you look at the sections, I think I understand the issue. Okay, when you look at the plan, you have this long wall. Okay, there's as much program on this side of the wall and on the other side of the wall. So all the elements that you can see on the other side are often programs that need to be dark or back of house. but also they allow everything that's on this side of the wall to be much lighter. So the fact that it's not a limit, but we build on both sides, it's almost like the building is the wall. It's an inhabited wall. It's, you know, when you take a line, if it's 1 meter by 10 centimeter, it's not the same as if it's 100 meter by 10 centimeter. When it gets so long, the thickness of it becomes secondary. That's what we wanted to do here, is to take the building and stretch it enough that its thickness disappears, and it becomes just the inhabited wall. Do you see what I mean? Okay.
اوكي لا خلاص اوكي لا كمان انا ما عندي شيء. لا وانا الحقيقه مش بتكلم على الماتيريال والثيكنس بالذات، انا بتكلم على انه جايز كنا نساعد الناس في اختيار السايت شكله عامل ازاي، لانه الحقيقه وانا جوه المبنى ما بلحقش اشوف كل الاثر بالشكل الكافي، وكنت عايز اعرف هو مبنى ساعتها هيبقى ستيب رحله خطوه في اجراء الرحله الكامله ولا لا، لانه شايف ان الاخشاب اللي بتحيط شكل المبنى من بره صحيح تزاجتها وهي لسه على بشكلها الاصلي حلو، لكن في الاخر ما اعرفش هتعمل فيا ايه وانا جوه المبنى. ساعتها كنت اقول اقفل الحكايه خالص او افتح منها كادرات للتفاعل مع الموقع او انها ما تبقاش موجوده، لكن في الاخر سيطره جمال العلاقات ما بين الخرسانه الفريش والخشب الفريش وعلاقتهم ببعض تغري اي معماري. لكن انا بتكلم من وجهه نظر مستخدم للمكان، صاحب رحله عايز اعملها في المكان، فكان ده غالبا اللي بيعمل لي وقفه، لاني لغتك المعماريه ما بين السوليد والفويد والخطوط الواضحه النقيه اللي فيها مينيماليزم دي حاجه جميله طبعا، لا يعني تغري اي معماري، بس الروح في حته كانت هي دي اللي كنت بدور عليها بس. لكن يعني مشروع كويس طبعا، بس كنت حابب نستزيد.
شكرا. أنا طالبة منك حاجة واحدة، لو أنك قادر باش تجاوبني بالعربية نسألك، لو ما قادر ننهي. جاوبني بالعربية؟
لا
خلاص ما عندي حتى سؤال. المشروع متناغم مع الأرض، مشروع قوي فيه الأعمدة للمشروع قوية، اختيار الخرسانة واختيار اللوح à l'état brut. Il y a un degré d'intégration qui est pratiquement parfait. ومن المشاريع القليلة اللي ما تحتاجش للتفسير، يعني كنا نستغنى على بشهادة أعضاء اللجنة كان مفهوم وكان فيه إجماع. عندي نوع من الديسيبسيون. عرفت بالعربي شنو ديسيبسيون؟ ديسيبسيون. علاش؟ هو هذا مهرجان لتكريم معماري عربي. يا أخي أعمل مجهود، كلمني بالمغربي، كلمني بالتركي، كلمني بالتركي ليه؟ ما فهمتني والله لا.
تركيا ما كاينش.
لا فهمت؟
لا
يعني
ممكن نتكلم معك بالعربيه، ولكن من تنهضر على المشاريع اللي تنخدم فيهم
لا
انا خصني I need precision. I need precision. دونك انا زدت وكبرت في المغرب، دونك غنتكلم معك اللغه المغربيه ما كاين حتى شي مشكل، ولكن ما تنخدمش بها. عشت بها ولكن ما تنخدمش بها. الا بغيت نتكلم معك باش تفهميش the heart of my work، ممكن لي نتكلم باللغات اللي تنخدم بهم هي الفرنسيه والانجليزيه. I teach in English, I teach in French. I wish I could do it better. The reason I don't do it, it's because I don't want to do disservice to the work. I can't do it and it's not going to be good. See, you said something which is the best compliment you can give an architect, is he doesn't need to talk about his work. And what I did when I presented to you, I didn't talk about my work. I explained why I'm doing it.
اللغة هي أداة، الإنجليزية والفرنسية هي أداة نستعملوها، ما تنسيناش في الأصل، فهمت؟ وانت المشروع بليغ فيه درجة من البلاغة تخلينا يمكن ما نسألكش ممكن السؤال أنا اللي نسأله لك كما قال زميلي السيد، افتقدنا للصور الداخلية، افتقدناها، أما هو حتى من الخارج إجابة شافية وكافية. شكرا على مجهودك، إن شاء الله تعمل شوية مجهود بالعربية.
إن شاء الله.
الحقيقة اللي أعجب وين أمهلك شوي، ما راح أطول عليك. بدك أحكي بالفرنسي؟ لا طبعا احنا لانه جائزه المعماري العربي فكنا حابين انه، لكن اذا ما بتستطيع اعطينا المجال انه يمكن تقدر تحكي باللغه الانجليزيه. ما يعني ما قيدنا، اللي ما بيقدر ما قيدناه. فهلا اللجنه اعجبت بكل النقاط اللي ذكروها زملائي، باحترام المشروع للموقع اللي قاعد عليه والآثار الموجودة في الموقع. أظن هذه كانت أكثر نقطة فيها حساسية. أنا بس بدي يعني أأكد على نقطة، أنت عجبني جدا بأنه البرنامج ممكن يتغير، يعني وهي يعني نقطة كتير إيجابية. لكن برنامجه هلا هو متحف، يعني في هذه المرحلة هو متحف، فما شفناش ديسبلاي لا للخارجية ولا للداخلية. من هون يعني، واظني انا قرات في انه جزء من الديسبلاي كان سسبندد، فكنا حابين نشوفه. لا من الداخل.
These photographs are taken before the display has been made. That's why.
Okay.
But
Before the display.
Yes, but I invite you to come. It's quite beautiful.
Okay. ان شاء الله الزياره الجايه بنشوف الديسبلاي كله.
Yes. ان شاء الله.
شكرا.
شكرا.
لحضورك.